while there's no specific mention of drunkenness in the next this text in chapter 19, it is more than clear that this is a matter of drunkenness. And I think also that the wine here is, as opposed to Noah sort of seemingly to be surprised by the getting drunk, the daughters of Lot quite clearly and conscientiously and quite plannedly are very much intending to achieve drunkenness for their father.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, there's this sense in which the wine itself isn't a bad thing, but it's the way it's used or the context in which it's being used that creates this narrative opening for something negative to happen. But the drinking itself isn't the immoral thing. It's the opening that provides the opportunity for the subsequent action.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that what's really interesting about both of these narratives is that in both of them, the person who consumes the alcohol falls asleep, and then there's some kind of sexual interaction afterwards. And I think that that's very telling, because it would seem to me that there are also other texts in the Hebrew Bible in which alcohol is used as a precursor to sexual intercourse or other sexual interaction, not necessarily where they're asleep, but there's this idea that it is a social lubricant, or even a sexual social lubricant. It allows people to become more laid back, and might even be seen as a kind of aphrodisiac because of the way it reduces inhibitions. And so, for example, in the story of David and Uriah, David invites Uriah back to feast and drink with him to try to encourage him to go see his wife Bathsheba to cover up the pregnancy that David has caused. He says to Uriah, go and wash your feet. Feet is a euphemism for penis, for the genitals. So he's literally saying, go and have sex with Bathsheba after he's encouraged him to drink wine. I think that also happens in Ruth. Naomi tells Ruth to not approach Boaz until after he's finished eating and drinking. So I think that there's this,
and he's feeling good.
Yeah, exactly. There's this common understanding that somebody who's a bit more tipsy is probably going to be more likely to have sex with you. And I think that underlying cultural information is creating the context for these two stories where Noah and Lot both get drunk and then something sexual happens to them.
Yeah. And two other things. One is it's the book of Genesis, so there's offspring that come out of these interactions, both of these interactions. But what you mentioned, the sexual aspect, it's hard to ignore that the very first two instances of drunkenness in the entirety of the Bible, sex happens, right? And so it's funny because it's hard now to think about, or drinking, both of them including, there's one other mention of wine between the two, but there's no necessarily drinking, it's wine as a gift. But in both of them, sex happens, although maybe potentially transgressive one way or another, but that's not something that's gone away from humanity. The association of wine or alcohol more broadly, and no one says, well, these texts are outdated, they have nothing to do with humanity at this point in time. They've remained with humanity for the rest of time. That I'm not saying that every single time that people are drinking, sex is going to happen, but it's not like it can happen.
Absolutely.
And not necessarily of a consensual nature.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And certainly for anybody who, deals with university students, that can happen.
Yeah, or even just ordinary people who are not university students.
That's also true, but there's a certain, I don't know, at least in America with university students, it seems to be certainly all the more so than necessarily non-university
Right,
students.
I see. Yeah, there's a certain stereotype there, which may be based on some truth. This story doesn't come across to us as something that's completely unbelievable or hard for us to understand what's going on, because we see it in our cultures as well.